repel government forces there and that they're holding on to the city. Reports from the hospital say at least 18 people have been killed in that area. Tripoli, and thousands of people gathering in support of Muammar Gaddafi, celebrating claims by the government that the rebels have been crushed and that fallen cities have been retaken. Let's try and cover a number of points that we brought up there with Tariq Youssef, Dean of the Dubai School of Government. Been following a lot of this with us here. Good to have you back on this news hour. Tariq, first of all, take a look at those pictures of the people in Tripoli. And you have to wonder whether all of them are there under duress, whether all of them actually hate Gaddafi and are pretending that they don't. And so the question to be asked is the country actually more split than most media reports are making it out to be?
Good question. I think we all recall a few days ago when Libya's former envoy to the UN suggested that 80% of those in Green Square are actually military and security personnel in civilian clothes. And he suggested this was a customary practice on the part of the regime to stage and orchestrate shows of support. This is not to deny that there aren't pockets of loyalists, hardcore loyalists who stand to lose. People also who have not known anything other than Gaddafi in the last 42 years. And people who might be thinking in terms of a clash between Libya and imperialist powers with designs on the country. So the support, the express support we're seeing in the squares of Tripoli could be a mixture of all the above. Important psychologically, to lift morale, to send a message of defiance, and also send a message that I am still in charge. And it's also a message to the opposition in the east that Gaddafi still remains in the stronghold of Tripoli. So until we sort of conduct a survey and ask everyone how they view Gaddafi and where they're likely to vote in case the country has ever a referendum, we have to assume that this regime is resorting to staging protests and demonstrations.
But I have to say once again that is an assumption, because until we go in and ask all of these people we won't know for sure. But what it does say for certain is that the possibilities of strife Libyan on Libyan are actually greater than perhaps we thought they might be at the beginning.
Possibly. Could very well be the case. And not necessarily along ethnic or sectarian lines, because the country is rather homogeneous, but possibly along regional lines and tribal lines. One thing Gaddafi could very well do in the hope of maintaining control is to essentially instigate fear within the tribal alliances he has and help to ignite a civil war that everyone is trying to avoid at the moment. That could very well be one of the scenarios.
I was listening to one of our guests in Washington, D.C., who was saying, defending the United Nations and saying, look, compare this to Bosnia, and they are acting very quickly. But I want to read you something out of the resolution that perhaps escaped a lot of people's attention earlier on this week. This was when we were talking about the Sanctions Committee being set up. Yeah. And it says the Sanctions Committee now has to report within 30 days to the Security Council on its first report. So it's not going to happen within a matter of days or even a couple of weeks. Yeah. They've got a month just to sit back and work out how best to impose sanctions.
Yeah. I think I do agree with the sentiment that the UN is moving extremely slow in light of the movement of events on the ground. And that's particularly worrisome because we are now approaching a situation in Libya where the forces on the side of the opposition are marching west to the stronghold of Sirte and possibly Tripoli, suggesting that we might be witnessing a catastrophic bloodbath in the next few days, weeks.
And do you think that any delay, even if there are those of the UN who think this is rapid movement, that any delay is actually going to weaken the position of those who are against Gaddafi?
It could possibly be the case, but that's also assuming that the US and the Europeans are going to always and only go through the UN to react should facts on the ground suggest that the country is getting into a dire situation that could have catastrophic spillovers, not just for the country, but the region at large. I'm still of the view that if push comes to shove, the US and the Europeans will find enough political will to push through any resolution to the UN to try to assist those in the opposition to avert a possible meltdown.
So you think China and Russia, who've so far said no to a lot of the suggestions put forward by, let's say, the United States and Britain would actually come on board?
I think they...
Or at least not vote against it?
A week ago, they voted unanimously with the rest of other members of the Security Council in a manner that was largely unexpected. I think looking back into history for guidance is sometimes helpful, but I think the facts in the Arab world have changed, and countries, by and large, in the Security Council are aware that they're witnessing earth-shaking movements within the region, and they do not want to be surprised. And certainly, I don't think they want to be on the wrong side of history.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Tariq Youssef from the Dubai School of Government. We thought some days ago that the events in Egypt had been superseded by what was happening elsewhere in the Middle East and North Africa, but it's still kicking off in that country. Most notably, we had army apparently firing shots into the air over the heads of protesters outside the Interior Ministry not so very long ago. So let's talk to AlJazeera's Ayman Mohyeddin, who is at that place. Tell me what you've heard, Ayman, or what you've seen.
Well, David, we got here a short while ago, and the situation certainly remains tense. The area directly adjacent to the Ministry of Interior has quieted down substantially from this afternoon, when about 1,000 or so protesters had gathered outside of that building in the same form that they did last night, hoping to enter that building and try to recover any documents or evidence they believe may incriminate senior officials of the regime. What happened today, though, slightly different, and it seems, according to the eyewitnesses that I've been speaking to, is that the military was not going to allow them to enter the building. A short while ago, about 90 minutes ago, there were reports that the military fired in the air to try to disperse those crowds. I can tell you from where we were standing, there were some tight alleyways, and that certainly created a bit of frenzy among the protesters as they tried to make their way away from the main building and into the side alleyways. And it's at that point, they say, they began to clash with what they described as thugs or other people that were against their demonstrations and their protests. So the situation, at least for now, near the Ministry of Interior has quieted down, but the protesters have slightly moved back in the direction of Liberation Square. There's about 1,000 or so protesters who are now regathering in Tahrir Square after this incident a short while ago.
Can you tie their frustration in with the fact that the country has a new foreign minister who, although he is new in the job, is still very much part of the old guard, if you like? He's been part of the Egyptian establishment for a very long time, and that the protesters may feel that it's more of the same?
Well, it seems that the protesters today, their demands are not directly linked to the political leadership of this country, particularly the new one. I mean, the grievances that we've seen over the past 72 hours, since there was the announcement of a new prime minister, has been really directed and geared towards the security institutions of this country, particularly the notorious state security. What we've seen develop over the past 72 hours are these flash protests that have been taking place all across the country at various government institutions belonging to the state security, because the rumors were, and the reports were, and the evidence that emerged suggested that members of the state security began to destroy evidence that may incriminate them, and that certainly angered a lot of the protesters who want to see that state security service dismantled. So